last night. Just last night.
All right, we're here for Walk the Line with its writer-director James Mangold, Reese Witherspoon, who plays June Carter, and Joaquin Phoenix, who plays Johnny Cash. Joaquin, let me start with you and ask you, was there something you wanted to convey specifically, you thought, with your version of Johnny Cash?
Was there something specific I wanted to convey? Well, it's something that Jim and I talked about very, very early on. I mean, you don't know what the tone is of a film like this, how the director wants to approach it. I remember talking to Jim and saying, what do you want to do with this? And he said, I don't want to tell a story about the icon. I want to explore the man. If people, I remember being really concerned about, the music and the singing. I think something we both were concerned about. And Jim said, if people want to hear Johnny Cash, they can get a Johnny Cash record. He's made a few. and oh, you're great. Tough crowd. So that was really our approach.
Reese, was there something too that you wanted to sort of get across in June? I'm just wondering if there's a quality you felt of hers that you wanted to sort of get into the character.
Oh, there's so much. I mean, she's such an amazing woman. I was, growing up in Nashville, Tennessee, I love country music, and it was the first thing I wanted to be when I was 6 years old. I wanted to be a country music singer, and so it was sort of a dream come true. But just building on what Joaquin said, it is a story about sort of their early life and finding themselves as adults and sort of their early love experiences. And in that way, there wasn't a whole lot of research that you could do about who they were before they were legends or before everyone in Nashville or all over the world knew who they were. So we were kind of coming at it with just reading. I mean, we read so much. We looked at so many videos. I was like, what about this video too? And he would give me DVDs, and it was just a lot of studying their performances, really, and trying to do the best we could.
Well said.
Right. Well,
That's how you do it. I needed lessons, and you weren't here for it.
I know.
You're great.
Well, Jim, let me ask you, because the movie really deals with the part of Johnny Cash that people don't think about so much, those early rockabilly days when he was becoming the Johnny Cash that we know.
Right.
And obviously that was crucial to you in terms of conception.
Well, it was, in a way, I didn't want to make a movie about what we already know. I mean, I think that both of the actors have touched upon this, the idea of not playing, it's really hard to play an icon. It's hard to play a legend. People may market it that way, people may think of John and June very rightfully that way, but you have to play a person. And that in many ways, because John and June were with us so close to when we started this movie, the idea of somehow moving into the later years almost seemed crazy to me. It seemed that what you'd want to make a movie about was the part of their lives and the part of that experience you're talking about, the Sun years, that no one knows anything about. Because I think there's a kind of sha-na-na-ification of that period where people don't remember how good that music was and how it isn't kind of just this Happy Days soundtrack. There's some real blood and guts in that music. And there was something really adventurous going on in that moment for young people lashing out against what I think I always hoped, without giving a history lesson, the movie would set up a little, is, that moment in 1954 when people started recording when people at Sun started recording, it was Doris Day, and the year Muzak was invented. It was Mantovani and Frank and Bing, and even in country music, it was a very smooth, rounded sound. So there's the arrival of the crack of that drum from these boys was a very big change in what young popular music was in that moment.
What's fascinating about it too, especially in light of the way people treating you guys here, is how basically approachable those country music stars were. And the scenes you have in just going to the pharmacy and having people come to June and talk to her like she was their own sort of misbehaving daughter. Right. How'd you find a way to play that?
Well, again, talking about what Jim was talking about, I mean, I think that it wasn't an accessible time for them. I mean, it's the formative time of their life where they were on the cusp of being famous or.
But it's also pop culture's on the cusp of sort of exploding too. Is that difference between what he was talking about versus rock and roll? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, this man went into Sun Records and said, I'm just going to sing a song where isn't that where he sings the Shut Man Reno and just to watch him die, And those were just explosive ideas at the time to take what was primarily a gospel industry and just turn it on its ear. You know, I think those are pretty exciting ideas.
Did you find yourself just listening to a lot of it in your head as you were playing the part, just having those Johnny Cash lyrics in your head?
Yeah, I mean, it's, that was the first thing that what was easiest to acquire was his music. I mean, right after I talked to Jim, I went out and I bought every album that I could, and it was interesting, again, like, when the Folsom Prison that I knew was from '68, was from the live album, and it was interesting to get his early recordings and hear really the progression of his music and the evolution, and to hear how an artist kind of develops a persona. Oftentimes we think that, like, we see somebody at their kind of final stage and we assume that they were kind of always like that. And it was so fascinating to see that evolution and how his music changed. And as we started prepping for it, for me, in really work on music and trying to learn to write music, I mean, that was something as well that was really important, was to understand what that process was and how themes change and melodies change and lyrics change. And there were some songs I remember listening with T-Bone, and we were going like, is this John? Are we sure this is John? Finding old recordings, and John didn't come out with that sound right away. It was something that was developed. But it was a great selection of songs that Jim pulled together. And obviously it's you learn so much about him through his lyrics. I don't know. He's such an amazing lyricist. He conveys so much with just a few lines. There's such depth to his music. So it was obviously a really big part of it. I think for both of us was the music. I mean, that to me was certainly the gateway into discovering John. It's like I feel like I found the speaking voice through the singing voice. And really learned a lot, about him through his music.
But also the way they really came to complement each other as a couple. I mean, being just sort of different emotional poles.
Yeah, I mean, we were very lucky. We had, lucky in some ways, but just terrified in other ways. We had 6 months of rehearsal where we just had to basically immerse ourselves in their music, and that's why we talk about the music. So that's interesting you say you found the voice of the music, because I don't know where you found it. It was creepy, because it was so authentic. He really immersed himself, but I got to see you sort of slowly take that journey and become more and more like John. And we had every day, we took voice lessons, we did guitar lessons. You took guitar lessons. I took auto harp lessons.
She set it all up, by the way. Joaquin, 3 o'clock, you'll be doing this. 4:30, you'll be like.
Well, I wasn't going to let them, I wasn't going to fall on my butt in front of people, or I was going to try as hard as I possibly could not to. And then we recorded for 4 hours, like every day for almost 5 months.
What was the first recording session like, just doing that music? What did that feel like to you?
Awful, just terrifying, awful. I screamed, I threw up, it was awful. It was terrifying. To be so out of your comfort zone. I mean, we've both been acting for years and years, but to go, oh, yeah, okay, especially for Joaquin to go, okay, I'm going to step in the shoes of a legend and, like, try and be this person that's so intimidating.
But you were doing that, too, because people felt like Cash and Carter were family to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. The nice thing is from the beginning, it always felt like this was really a process-oriented film, and we weren't looking for the end result. It's like, in working with T-Bone, it wasn't like, how do we sound like John or June, but what are the lyrics? What is the story that they're telling? And it was really nice to approach it that way. I mean, we were sitting in T-Bone's house, where his studio is, and we sit on the couch and play through the songs and sing along, and so it was a really
We couldn't even look at each other the
process.
first time we had to do it. It was like, I didn't even know him that well. And
But, Jim, you really,
don't look at me while I sing.
I think the thing is the thing we all keep saying one way or another is John was not just, as many people of the day were, a performer and a singer, but he was a songwriter. And in that way, like one of the things that always guided me, even though it doesn't feature in the film as much, was, there's this, I go out to a party to look for a little fun, but I find a darkened corner because I still miss someone. That's just a little couplet from one of his pop songs, his earliest writings. I mean, he was always riding this river of shadows in his writing that was so revealing about his feelings and so revealing about his even unaware ambition to try to put a real sense of regret or pain or of emotion into what had at that moment in rockabilly was mainly like, I love you, baby, and I want you.
Or just trying to hide using sex in songs, so you're singing around that.
He was singing around it, but he was singing about a kind of pain that is really normal for any young person to feel, but it was, we all look back, having been through Sex Pistols, Nirvana, et al., it all seems so common, but it was a moment where it's like everyone harps on, and very rightfully, I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die. That's before Taxi Driver. It's before Psycho. It's before, this is someone scratching on the edge of something really frightening and an ambivalence about violence and sadness that is really brand new to the world at that moment.
Rudy Blair here, 680 News. This question is for Mr. Phoenix. Hi.
Hi.
Talk about the mannerisms that you had to learn from being Johnny Cash, because there are certain points in this movie that, because I didn't think you could pull it off, but there are certain points you swear you look like and you're acting like Johnny Cash, like the way you played the guitar, the way you moved around, even the way you spoke too.
Yeah. Well, again,
That's
the music again was the gateway for so many things, and that's one thing that I noticed. I met with Jim and I bought a guitar. And what's the quote? What did John say that whoever plays it, he has to hold guitar?
Don't hold it like a baby. Don't hold it like a baby. And then he grabbed the neck. It was one of the first things when I went with Kathy and James Keach. James took us to meet John for the first time in Hendersonville. And one of the first things John said is, don't let whoever plays me, at this point was before Joaquin was involved, hold the guitar like it's a baby, like this. And then he grabbed it with one hand from the neck, but the message was clear, which is just, it's an extension of me.
Right.
Meaning that thing is an extension of me. And
that totally
that answers really to the point with a question I think we all get asked a lot, which is why did they have to sing? Why were we so sure that, as the people behind the scenes, we really wanted this to happen? And it's in a sense the exact same answer to that question. Don't hold the guitar like it's a baby. It's like we couldn't make that so special and something that we'd all dance around to be frightened of. That's who they were. To play them, you had to be them. To be them, you had to be musical. To be musical, you have to be musical.
Practice.
And so anything else would be this weird half a performance where the other half is like CG or something, and it just wouldn't have been right.
So a lot of the mannerisms. I didn't want to just be doing mannerisms for the sake of doing it. And I want to understand why he had certain movements. And he had this one thing that initially I thought was just kind of a tick, where he lifted his head up, and I realized he was taking like a huge gulp of air. He lift his mouth and breathe, and so I just started using that for whenever I breathed, and then really. I think this was dictated because of his size. He was really big, he had these really long arms. He played around the back of the guitar. And that, when I first bought the guitar, I just played how I've always seen people play, which is you put your arm over like this. And I'd kind of learned a little bit like that, learned to change chords like that. And then I started watching this footage, and I went, oh no. He plays completely differently. And so it was like back to square one, and I had to put my arm around like that. And he just had a really interesting style, like the way, again, it's like he wasn't precious with the guitar. It was really amazing. I was fascinated by the movement, by his particular strum, the kind of standard strum was the doom, chicka doom, and he had this strange, inconsistent variation on it that you really couldn't break down technically. It was impossible. I remember sitting with Kit, who taught both of us, and going like, I can't understand exactly what's happening here, because there were these odd little rhythms in between that he would do. And so first you just broke it down very technically and did the simplest version, which was doom, chick, doom, chick, doom, chick, and then got to the point where I could move that faster. And then just, he used to dance up and down the neck, which I just thought was so wonderful. And John seemed to feel, I know he wrote about this. I remember reading where he was always uncomfortable speaking in front of crowds unless he had his guitar. So even when he was going just to speak, he would take his guitar with him. And I saw that firsthand when I met him, and in videos that I'd seen, he'd be up on stage and he'd play and he'd look totally comfortable and he'd be talking to people and then he'd put it behind his back and he'd immediately kind of get stiff. And it was so strange, but that's where he felt most comfortable. So, you know, I started holding a guitar kind of no matter what I was doing. I always had a guitar. So I hope that answered a question.
What was your first meeting with him like?
Well, I met with I met with John, actually not related to the film at all, and I was just invited over to dinner with him at his friend's place in Los Angeles, and it was an amazing meeting. I mean, what I really took from it, and in hindsight, what really helped me with the film was seeing John and June together, and this very special dynamic they had. After dinner, John came into the living room, and I was in there with his daughter and some of his grandchildren, and he picked up his guitar and he started strumming a little bit. And
Was that Roseanne you were with?
I can't recall. I'm sorry. And he's there for a little bit, and then he leans over and he said, you know, I'm waiting for June to get my nerve up. I thought, God, John Cash is waiting for June to get his nerve up, and June came in and he says, June, will you sing a song with me? He said, of course. And they sat down. They sang On the Banks of the River Jordan. Is that what it's called? Which is an amazing song. And there's like 6 of us in the room, and they're looking into each other's eyes, singing this song. And like, I'm kind of cynical about duets and like married people like singing songs, because I think of like Sonny and Cher. You know what I mean? Like I always see this, and there was such truth and honesty and beauty, and you really got the sense that this is what they were like at home. And I think that's kind of the power of their music, is like, whenever I listen to John's music, I feel like I'm right there with him. There's not that normal boundary between artist and audience that you feel with so many popular musicians. And somebody that was as popular as they were. And it was amazing to see that love.
It's probably the reason so many people like Christopherson and Dylan went to them, because of that honesty you were talking about. They ended up shaping them too.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, John, in making the movie, that was our central challenge, but also our central North Star. Our guidance was just trying to be as authentic and honest in performance and in being these people and not being the legend. I mean, that the greatest enemy of us, I would always say this thing about, like, I don't want to make a Disney Hall of Presidents movie. You know, I don't want to make this kind of animatronic recreation of great moments in rockabilly history. Yeah, because for me, that would first of all not be fair to Reese or Walk, or any of the other performers in the movie, but it also ultimately wouldn't be fair to John and June, because it's not first and foremost who they were. They were incredibly feeling people.
I think we have a question over here.
Mila Kanev, Mix TV. Actually, you did a really terrific job, guys. I really enjoyed it, and it's such a chemistry, great. I wanted to know if the proposal really happened in life, like on stage in front of the audience, or it was created.
Yes, it happened.
I had that same question.
In Ontario. In Ontario, at the London, yeah, it happened here. London Terrace, isn't it the London? I mean, I don't have it, but the theater's name is London, Ontario? Yeah.
Now that you can and you have the ability, do you ever sit around the house on like Sunday with a guitar singing Johnny Cash songs?
It's terrible. You know, I always have the experience, like when I finish a film, I usually distance myself really from it as much as possible for a certain amount of time. Last week is the first time I think since I've been done that I pulled out my guitar and I played like one chord and I was like, I'll put that back.
Reese, you grew up in Tennessee, so you grew up around knowing that the Grand Ole Opry and WSM and all that kind of stuff. Did you ever get a chance to meet them, or was your experience with them just hearing the music and seeing them on television?
Yeah, unfortunately, I never got to meet them. When I first met Jim, it was at a party or something, and he said, "I'm making a movie about Johnny Cash." I said, "Oh, that's so exciting!" And little did I know. But he called me a couple years later, and he said, I talked to you about this Johnny Cash movie, and I'd like you to play June. And I said, well, now, Jim, in June, something like 70 years old. I said, I can't play June. And he said, no, we're going to do it. We're going to do the young version. So anyway, no, I never got the opportunity. I was pregnant and traveling, and I sort of passed them. We sort of passed each other. But I feel really lucky to be able to get a chance to do this. It's sort of a dream come true for me.
Well, the thing you get to do, and it's actually kind of in the book too, is that sort of sense of them really complimenting each other. Basically, she was sort of his skin because he was so sort of sensitive, I think. That's where all that stuff came from.
Well, they were each, I think, an antidote for the other. I mean, I think there was so much they drew. John, at least for me in creating imagery or working with actors, that is imagery that's simple, that you can play and not like a roadmap from AAA. The idea sometimes is that, like to me, it was just John had a hole in his heart. I don't know what it was from. Was it his childhood? Was it this? Was it that? Or was he born with it? But somehow June was an antidote to that in my head, and that was the simplest, cleanest line I thought you could play. It's like magnets, it was just, there was something, and I think that in it less talked about, but I think also interestingly in June's case, I think there was something, she grew up on stage, June did, and she grew up as part of the old school or the previous generation's music industry, and I think there was something so attractive and exciting and moving for her about what was happening in music right then, and I think she had the wisdom and also the edge and the creativity to want in a way to be part of that, and I think John was a real ambassador for her in a way to the edge, or away from a kind of very safe place that she had been occupying as part of the first family of country music, which I mean on the most simple level, it's the most wonderful set of opposites you could ever encounter in terms of where they came from.
It's also, too, about him needing a family and her coming with kind of a ready-made family.
Yes. And I mean, the other things that people ask us if it really happened, June's family really did guard the house and ward off drug dealers when John was going through his detox. And I think that it almost staggers the mind, the kind of generosity. I mean, these were people who were still huge stars of country music who were sitting on John's porch, protecting what, in a way, you almost think they had to know was one of the great jewels of the future. And that I think all of it moves me to no end because it doesn't always resemble what we have now. And the kind of loyalty and the kind of fabric of community that existed in the arts in that particular community anyway, that's so rare now.
He's pretty good at this stuff, isn't he?
Yeah.
Hi.
I gave him that actually last bit.
I was going to say, I heard you say that last
Didn't you?
night.
Yeah. Okay. Stop watching my interviews and taking it from me.
come on.
Okay. Really.
So-
That's what directors do. They take credit.
Yeah.
Hi. Joshua Wilson, Jarrett Rogers Television. I so love the idea that you guys chose to sing on your own. Did you accept the role with the knowledge that you were going to sing? And because you did so well, is it something that you have always done? Have you always both sung?
No and no.
Go ahead.
Right? Well, no, I mean, it was, I think it was to be decided. I mean, the hope was that we could sing, but I mean, when we got to LA to start prepping, I mean, it was no guarantee. I mean, I remember sitting down with T-Bone the first night and going through some songs.
Okay, maybe they told you were going to sing, but they didn't tell me.
No, that's what I'm saying.
I was sure we were going to have, like, Leanne Rimes sing my part. I was so
No.
excited.
No, we didn't. I didn't know.
I love her. She's so nice. She's going to be perfect as June, and then I'm just going to come in and do the other part. But actually, so Jim said to me, no, Reese, you're actually doing it. I was like, actually, I'm not, Jim. Actually, I'm not. He said,
No, you are.
No, really, you are. And so we actually, got to kind of a place, and he said, you're definitely going to try. And I said, okay, I'll try. But I'm really happy about that experience because he's right. So much of who they were as people was musicians and playing every day and practicing and knowing other musicians. And it was such a culture of supportive artistry.
when you work with really good actors, two things happen. One is that, young actors who are just starting out, a lot of people tell you, one of the roles a director plays is to help them be aware of what they're doing looks like. What does it feel like from the outside? Actors at the point these two are at, they might disagree with me, but don't pay attention. At the point they're at, which is very far along, they are both deeply internal and they know, but they also know what they're doing feels like to the camera. They have a really profound relationship with the camera as well because they're really experienced. And so what does that mean in relation to the singing? When you enter a territory where each of them is, as they said, completely brand new, there is all those barometers of how am I doing? What does this sound like? Is this good? All these very sharp instrument panel that they have that has guided them through all sorts of movies suddenly are useless, and it's very frightening. And I thought my biggest role in all this was to just believe, because I really believed in them, first of all, as hardworking actors and incredibly gifted actors, but I also really believed that we had no choice. That although I would sometimes say to each of them as a kind of escape valve, oh, we could always fix it later, the point is that but the bottom line was that there was no way to fix it later and be here. Meaning that in the same way Wak described what it was like to be with John and someone who was music, to take that away from them and turn them both into kind of Natalie Wood in West Side Story would not be true to the energy of these people as storytellers, which is what they were, which is what what John and June were.
Hi there, Donna Moran, CBS Radio. Just to piggyback on that question, can each of you talk about the fear that you had and at what point it became clear that actually you were going to be able to pull it off? Because you did a really fine job.
It was never really clear to me. I mean, again, like James said, I mean, I relied so heavily on Jim and T-Bone, for this. It's really hard to tell when you get there. I never really had that experience, even in acting, going like, yes, I'm there, I've got it, I got this nailed. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like every day is you're constantly striving, to work on it. And now I've completely forgot what we're talking about.
I think there was a point. I think for both of them, there was a point just a few weeks before we started shooting.
So will you? No.
Where I think there were 2 points for me where things became clear. I think there was a point where they got enough in a groove with the work they were doing that they were no longer just thinking only about how to get off the train, but they were thinking about, they just had work to do because they now knew the chords, they could play the songs, they could just lose themselves in the material. And I think there was a second point, which is the first time they each played live in front of the extras we had in Memphis, and that they felt the warmth of people instead of hostility or questions or snickers or anything. And I think that for all of us, I think we owe a real debt to all those wonderful people who are our extras in Memphis I always remember those scenes in Texarkana and how we were all shitting bricks at that moment, and that we did those scenes and there was such a feeling of euphoria around this theater, as if something bigger, we're actually in Memphis at one of the theaters they all played, and there was something bigger than any of us happening that actually took us out of all of our kind of petty fears for a moment and took us to something, okay, they weren't petty, but took us out of our fears and took us and just made us suddenly excited about something we were part of, or I know that was true for me.
Yeah. One thing that working with the band actually really felt like a breakthrough for me when Dan Miller and Larry Bagby came in for the last week. I think we were in Los Angeles. That first week it was Rocky who we just all kind of just met. We're working, but when we got into Memphis and I had an apartment there and we just practiced every day. And I remember at one point we finished the song and there were no mistakes. And we remembered everything, and I couldn't believe it. And it was just like what you're talking about, where you're no longer thinking about it anymore, and it just happens. And it's after like months and months of work and months of sitting and breaking things down technically, and at some point, kind of the soul and the power of the music takes over and becomes the dominant force.
Reese, did you find it was easy for you to sort of use your fear in that same way, that sort of trepidation you had about the part, to sort of marshal that into the performance?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I was nervous the whole time. I never stopped being nervous. But my ears were sweating, my knees were sweating. And it was really challenging. But I think after a week of shooting on any movie, you realize you can't quit. So I was just, we were there. And you know what? I just want to say something about Joaquin and the guys. They literally practice like every day. They do a 12-hour shooting day or 14-hour shooting day, and then they go home and they practice more. And it was just really thrilling to me to see that kind of conviction and not taking anything as a lark or like a given that it was going to be perfect or someone else would fix it. It was like Joaquin and the other people really took on, really the heart of the film is how this performance that he gives and how hard he worked. And I'm going to get upset, but it was really moving.
Something I was really conscious of when we set out, my first film, actually the last time I was at this festival, was a film called Heavy. And in the cast of that movie was also Deborah Harry, Evan Dando, musical people as well as what you normally just call actors. And one of the things I was really excited about in making this film was I felt there was an opportunity to cast musicians as well as actors in the same sense that Joaquin and Reese were being asked to stretch, asking others to stretch in other directions. Not simply because, oh, isn't that cute and what a panoply of life's world we have in the movie, but because it meant that Joaquin and Reese, for instance, would have things to offer their bands or the musicians in the film with them who were completely green about what is that big Panavision thing sliding toward me and what do I do? And at the same time, I mean, it created a community. And what I always remembered on my first film was how gratified I was at night when we'd come home from a day's shooting and, there'd be like this little hootenanny at the Holiday Inn with all these cast members from my film and how music was such an incredible stress reliever, and that somehow I felt if we could create and cast the film with both a mixture of actors and musicians, we'd have, in the same way, it wouldn't be 19 actors all with their brand new guitars terrified, it would be a combination of people. And I'm really proud of the way that came out because I think that it's worth mentioning Dan John Miller and Larry Bagby and Waylon Payne and many others, Jonathan Rice, all of whom came and were incredible big part of not just a couple lines they had here or a presence in a scene here, but they were part of a feeling and a feeling that I can't create and no one can create, but it's just something that kind of happens with people who might be singing in the trailers or after work or whatever.
Hi, Ann Brody, Guardian Entertainment. It's about time somebody did a terrific big budget picture on Johnny Cash. What you get with that, though, is the wonderful music and the creativity of the man. But you also get, for his conservative fan base, his outrageousness, his drug use and all of that. Do you expect any kind of reaction to it?
I think that his fan base knows who he is. I think they love him for who he is. That's why they'd come to the movie. I mean, no one wants to see a greeting card. People want to see a life, and a life has ups and it has downs. And certainly, to me, nothing could be more positive to the most conservative or liberal among us that someone makes mistakes in life and turns the ship around. That to me is the greatest thing anyone can do with their life.
What's fascinating with that question too is that fan base abandoned him, and it was the MTV rock and roll audience who took him on again because he was still that same sort of gladiator. You're probably using that word.
I wouldn't use the word abandoned. I don't think he has a base that abandoned him.
But radio certainly did. It took a whole new audience coming around him, basically showing that even 30 years later, guys like Trent Reznor were influenced by him so much he could do Hurt and make it sound like it was a song that he had written.
Well, John was a really cool man. I mean, the ability to sit and talk with him about, Nebraska's my favorite Springsteen album, he would say, or he could talk about Elvis Costello's last album as easily as he could talk about Jimmy Rogers or the Delmore Brothers or Hank Williams or anything few and far between. He was in the same way that he had seen their movies and he had seen my films and he drank up literature, he drank up music, he drank up movies. That was part of the reason when I first was blessed and got to meet him, that I felt like it couldn't possibly be beyond his imagining that we'd be asking to go to some of the darker places in his story, because he had to, of all people, understand that to go to the light you had to pass through the dark.
Yes. Hi, John Stern, CMT Radio. In the past, Nashville has been somewhat critical sometimes of films when you tackle such an iconic star. Was there any trepidation going into this project itself, and how do you think Nashville will react to the film?
I'm very lucky in a couple respects. One is that that I have a great partner, Kathy Conrad, who does a lot of thinking about the potholes that could be ahead for me that I somehow am so stupid I don't even ever consider. I mean, it's part of my advantage is that like when I took this on, I didn't think, I mean, to be honest, I didn't think about anything. I mean, some later point I went, holy shit, we're taking on, there's a lot of people, a lot of expectations about a movie like this. But the one thing that having great people around you and supporting you is that you're allowed to play. And the big thing I wanted to do, to touch upon what Elvis said at the very start, was like, I loved this moment in rockabilly music. I loved the idea of people making music because they loved music and not because they saw the video or how to market themselves. You know, a very big point for me in this movie is John didn't arrive at Sun as the man in black. He didn't already know his marketing angle. He didn't have it worked out. He didn't have, you know, Kiss makeup on and knowing how you're going to sell him. He was just here trying to be heard. And however that would work or not work was fine, but he just needed to be heard. And I think that so much in music today, that's so rare. And it's almost hard, even for a young person who wants to make music, who is trying to do what's true to themselves in a world in which, you know, we're suddenly, the second you even get to point A, you're confronted by journalists who are asking you, so do you see yourself as the next blah? You know, that it's like, it's very hard to remain true to a voice inside yourself when the world is so incredibly boxed and hyped so quickly. And what was magic to me about that moment was it was a moment before the term rock and roll star existed. And as John said in one of the last conversations I had with him, you know, he never anticipated being anything more than a guy who got his song on the radio. All he wanted was to get his song on the radio. And at the point when that happened with Cry, 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 he was in freestyle for the rest of his life. He had no plan, he had no dream. He didn't have, like, you know, what suit he'd wear to the Grammys in mind. He didn't think he'd ever get farther than calling home and saying, listen, tonight on the radio, that's me. And that really moves me because I think that kind of humility is so rare in what we do now.
But there's also a sense, too, and I want to start with you, Joaquin, then go down. You're playing somebody who basically couldn't stop, who couldn't help what he was. Even if he didn't feel like performing or playing or writing, he had to do that. How do you find that part of yourself to play somebody who basically is sort of consumed by this force that's bigger than he is?
What did you say?
2, 3, 4. No, he's basically a guy who's obsessed. I mean, he can't help himself. He's taking these pills, he's drinking, he's chasing other women, but these songs still keep pouring out of him.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, there was such soul to his music, and it wasn't anything that was that seemed planned. I mean, it feels like it's something that he had to do, and I don't know, you know, where that started, you know, where it comes from, but it seemed that he was compelled to tell a story. And again, you know, it's interesting to see the development of his music, and you know, from the beginning, how truthful he was. I mean, while he hadn't developed the man in black persona, there was still something very unique about his music and about his lyrics. I mean, "Hey Porter" is one of the first songs that he'd written. You know, there was such power. So it seemed beyond. I think so many artists now are looking at the end result. They want to achieve fame, and I think John had something to say. He simply really spoke from the heart.
But Reese, basically, a lot of times she's trying to keep away from him because she feels he's dangerous, but she's sort of compelled to. She can't stay away from this guy. Is it easy for you to play obsession like that, or how did you find a way to do that, to find that character?
Well, we talked about it a lot, Jim and Joaquin and myself, about why this woman had already been twice divorced, and she had 2 different children. She was definitely leading a very modern life for a woman during a very repressive time for women, and definitely living on the edge of society. So for her to, be pulled into this relationship with this sort of dangerous character, we had to sort of find what was it that makes her ultimately succumb to what was, ultimately the romance of her life. And so we worked a lot on that, and what was that moment? I was always like, what is that moment, A woman doesn't just sleep with a man just because she has to make the decision, and so we worked a lot on that. And I also think, they were really extraordinarily spiritual people who really believed in, and what you were talking about, their humbleness and their humility, but they really were people that believed that they were put on this earth to be together, and that they had a higher purpose, and that, a strong understanding of everybody, not just the famous people they ran into, not just the artists that were hot and cool at the time. They were very interested in the guy next to them's story, and in that they had a kinship, that they were regular people, they really had authentic country roots. These people she came from a little dirt farm in West Virginia, although her parents were musicians. There's a real authenticity to that, and Johnny really grew up picking cotton in a field. That's a sense of you never think you're any better than where you came from.
They were the last generation. I mean, I remember the last time we saw June alive, I was playing her these songs from an iPod of mine, of just old transcriptions that I had gotten from record dealers around the country of things that were out of print. And one of the things that really, it just dawned on me, I meant out of my body for a moment, watching her kick up her heels with this little white device around her head. And I thought, she's the last generation. John and her are the last people who can sing about these things firsthand, You can't, it's part of the reason country music, people I think put down country music sometimes, is that they have a hard way of understanding that, it isn't country music, it's music. And the fact is that these people grew up in a field, and that's what they're singing about. But it's no different than singing about the streets of Seattle or any place else you grew up. The thing that seems odd is watching really glamorous people from Los Angeles sing about cotton picking. Well, that's not what this was, and that's not what they were. They were actually singing about what they saw. When John sang about a flood, or June sang about the first time she heard a song on a jukebox, it was the absolute elation of hearing a recording for the first time, a record. It was invented not that long ago, and so there's a kind of, I don't know, it's just putting your head in that moment when realizing that these people were ambassadors. At least there were times when it looked like this movie wouldn't get made, and one thing that all of us, Kathy, James, myself, Reese and Joaquin, T-Bone, we'd all say to ourselves is that if this thing doesn't happen, we will have had the experience of at least trying, and that getting closer to these people and this music was something that changed all of us, I think, a lot.
Joe Layton, San Francisco Examiner and Nashville Tennessean. It would seem to me, for all three of you, one of the biggest challenges you had to face is you're making a movie about people that we all think we already know. Well, we don't, and we're in for some surprises. For the three of you, what surprised you the most while you were doing research on this film, when you were getting to know these people?
First. You go.
Well, there's not one thing. I honestly, I knew so little about John's life. So, it was, it was amazing to get into the research and learn. And I think that's the thing with so many artists and people that are famous. We hear a couple of those stories, certain events, and we kind of, attach our idea to them and assume that that's kind of their whole story, and I think for me, what I was most surprised about was their relationship and the enduring love and their romance, which I knew so little about, and which was unbelievably inspirational and beautiful and true, and so I think that's what stood out. But there are so many things. I mean, I think what's difficult and why Jim did such an amazing job with the script is as you start researching them, John and June, you want to make a 20-hour movie. I mean, every time you read a page, you go, but this is an amazing story. How do we not tell this story? But wait, what about this with him and Orbison? And there were so many stories, and it was, I can't imagine what it was like to try and condense it down into 2 hours and just tell the story that you wanted to, because they had such rich lives, totally unique and amazing. So I can't think of one thing really.
I can tell you one thing that always surprises others, which is everyone thinks like John did Serious Time. I think it's I think it's there were wonderful things that I think we get to, like, a lot of people walk in going, oh yeah, he's going to be doing Serious Time in this movie. And I think the other thing is not knowing that June wrote Ring of Fire. I think there's a lot of things and how incredibly revealing that is about each of those facts in and of themselves are facts, but I think as a writer, co-writer and director of this movie, I think that one of the things Gil and I found working on the script, and one of the things that I certainly found working with these actors, was that how much these themes actually were important. Like, okay, he never did time, but in a way he did. Like, part of John's fascination with prisons might not have been because he spent time in them physically, but in a way he really did spend time in one. And June was his warden who let him out. And that in many other ways, June reveals in that song how she was so much more than kind of this vaudevillian, opera comedienne. I mean, that is one of the great pieces of songwriting of the century. And then the power that it's written about the guy who made it a hit. And it's written about the guy, and that then you find that you're making a movie that is not only a collection of people's hit music that they made and the dramas they lived, but actually the music they made is like it's a musical. It's such an incredible evocation of their own struggles, being in love with one another, struggling with the shadows of their lives.
Well, based on the shadows the photographers are throwing on us, I think we're out of time. So let's thank the group from Walk the Line.
How did